Today, we're going to look over the only viable builds for Zizzarin's Gauntlet. As you can see, we have your Seismic Trap, we have your Explosive Arrow, we have your Detonate Dead, and even if you're feeling spicy, Spark. Dual-Wield Molten Strike. The Gauntlet is coming out soon, and I feel like the Path of Exile community has a really hard time understanding that viable builds are aplenty right now, even melee builds, even dual strike melee builds, even dual strike melee builds that focus on block. I have no expectations of like winning the race or anything, but I do have the expectations of getting to level 99 or level to 100 with the build. Once I reach my level goal, I'm going to be pretty happy with the build. I'm going to consider this build successful. Then I'll get into the bosses and die. But it's really defensive. Listen, we have 150% increased life, which sounds bad, but we have a lot of other layers of defenses. We are, of course, running the Grace, Determination, Defiance Banner trio because it's just broken. You can only stretch the meta so far. We have 50 attack block and 50 spell block, not conditional, so it's all the time, 100%. 100% spell suppression. We're looking at about 2 to 2.3-ish million DPS. This is plenty for my purposes. I don't have any expectation of actually killing Uber Maven or anything, or going to any of the Uber bosses in Gauntlet. Again, as long as I can get this build to like level 99 and not die, I feel like that's gonna be a pretty successful build in any other circumstance, so I'm pretty satisfied with it as is. Keeping in mind, I do have the POB set to Guardian and Pinnacle bosses, but if we were to go to just regular enemies, we would be looking at like 3.4 million-ish damage, which I don't know, I think that's pretty good. We're going to be using a champion because as much as I hate following the meta, the champion is pretty unstoppable when it comes to defenses, and in Gauntlet, defenses are king. So we're kind of pigeonholed into this if we want to do anything out of the ordinary here. First things first, we're going to take Unstoppable Hero, then go into Fortitude for our second Ascendancy. For our third Ascendancy, we're going to be going for the Banner Reservation node. This allows us to run Arrogance with our banner to increase the aura effect, and we can run Herald of Ash for more damage and Wave Clear, which as we get into maps will be very helpful. For our final Ascendancy, of course, we are going to be finishing off with Adrenaline. This does give you additional Fizz damage reductions, which is pretty good timing because you're going to need that extra damage and physical reduction against these rares that are going to be whooping y'all ass. As you can see, our passive tree actually leans to the left first. These reservation nodes are extremely important to the build. Not only do we need them to enable a Grace and Determination combo, but we also need them if we plan to run Herald of Ash. However, as you're leveling the build, you need generic attack leech nodes like this one. Keep in mind, we're a full fire conversion build, so physical leech nodes are not going to work. So we're not using mana to reserve our banner because it's a free reservation anyway. We're going to be pairing it with Arrogance to get the increased aura effect. We are also running Precision. It's only 200 life anyway, and you know what? That's worth it to get like 70% increased critical strike chance and like a bajillion accuracy, so I'm gonna run it. We're also running our Righteous Fire. That way we can help trigger Adrenaline if our Divine Blessing Anger setup isn't working. We also run this on an Arrogance with an increased duration because we have the spare gem slot anyway, but you can drop increased duration if you have to. I'm gonna try to pair this up with my Adrenaline procs, but we'll see how the duration looks. That's my plan. We are running block on the build. This is, of course, completely optional. I'm doing it because we're in Gauntlet and I don't want to die, but we are running 50-50 block. Keep in mind, we are dual wielding. You have to be careful about which block nodes you pick. I would highly recommend you download the POB and make the build better, but let's just move on because I want to. We also take the sword block nodes here because we are running dual one-handed swords. Our gem links are pretty simple. We have Molten Strike linked with elemental damage with attacks, fire penetration, multi-strike, increased crit strikes, and increased crit damage. The reason why we have increased crit strikes and increased crit damage is because it's hard to find gems that scale both the melee hit and the projectiles. If all we had to worry about was the melee hit, we would be using different gems, but we need to maximize the damage we have. Keeping in mind, we are a melee dual-wielding build in Gauntlet, so we gotta be a little picky, you know? One thing to keep in mind is that when you're in Path of Building, you have to be careful with how you calculate Molten Strike DPS. It doesn't actually include the balls in your total DPS. It's either the melee hit or the balls, and both are very, very important to the damage. If you're missing one, you're probably missing like 70 to 50% of your total overall damage. We are going to be running Redeemer jeweled foils. The reason why is we want that plus 8% chance to block attack damage while dual wielding. If we don't have that block damage while dual wielding mod, that's fine. There's actually a dual wielding mastery that allows you to get a temporary plus 30% spell block until you block something and then you lose it. It's not a great band-aid, but it is a band-aid. If you're worried about damage, right now we have a 430 DPS jeweled foil. That is extremely attainable, and if you're willing to use any amount of recombobulators, you could probably do way better. I'm just planning around having this range of weapon damage with the attack block while dual wielding mod. We have it on both jeweled foils for 16 block, but it's one of those things where it's either this or the mastery. Either one is fine. This is a little better. On our chest, we also have chance to block attack damage as the craft. It's not the best craft, very far from it, but again, we want that permanent 50-50 block uptime, and dual wielding doesn't have much in the way of block nodes on the tree, so we gotta make do with what we have. Another important item slot is our amulet, not for damage reasons, but for leech reasons. You see, when you're not a chieftain and you go full fire conversion like we are with the fire mastery and molten strike also converting to fire, we have to be careful about where our leech comes from. Like I said earlier, physical damage leech on the tree doesn't work with our build. We need generic attack damage leech or fire damage leech to life like on this elder amulet. That's where I'm planning to get our leech from, and when we do, we can respec some of the tree to get into that fortify mastery that gives us 10% reduced damage taken over time, which is great for our build. Part of me is worried about the current Path of Exile community and the racing culture going on right now. I worry that we have pigeonholed ourselves into thinking only a very few select builds are actually viable. I want to do a dual-wielding melee build, not because it's viable in the eyes of the community, not because I'm trying to trick new players into playing a build they can't play, not because I'm trying to prove everyone wrong, but because I want to. It's fun. I think that you do yourself a serious disservice by not making your own build in Path of Exile. I think the worst way to play this game is to go online, look up a Zizaran build guide, get a step-by-step leveling instruction on the most efficient way to play the game, and then follow the build to the T, including how to get most of the mods you want on items. That to me is boring. That to me isn't fun, that isn't interesting, and it isn't what makes Path of Exile good. Path of Exile is at its best when you can pick a build and follow through on it. When you make a build and it kills a boss. Because very, very few players, unfortunately, actually make their own build in this game. Everybody copies, and to me that's so sad that there's this whole world of builds out there and this whole, like, there's so many things you could do. There's so many defensive options, so many offensive options, so many ways to scale damage, so many ways to cheat the game, it feels like, and nobody wants to do those because it's not the best at doing it. In other words, if you think this build isn't viable, what's the best build you can come up with?